Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Now, I am here to disrupt traditional thinking. And what better place to do it than in the centre of disruption, this fantastic Disrupt, Startup, Scale Up event. Now, I'm here because I have a very important message to share with you all. And that is that you are all much, much smarter, much more intelligent, much cleverer, much more able to think of ingenious ideas than you believe yourselves to be. But you might not trust me, so I'm going to invite you to trust Jason. Now, Jason actually starts off with a lie here, because on his Facebook profile, he says he lives in Greece. But I met Jason about 4 weeks ago on a workshop that I run locally to me in East Sussex in England. And he'd come to me because he no longer owned that big house in the background, and he no longer had that smile on his face because his business in Greece had collapsed, and he'd found himself unemployed and back in England. Now, Jason, at the time that I met him, was moaning about how could he get a business off the ground. There was no money, there was no clients, he had no contacts. And then 3 weeks into the workshops, he took to Facebook one evening, and he'd been moaning that the phone wasn't ringing, when suddenly he says it's amazing what some positive thinking can do, because he's back in business again now. During the workshops, he'd been telling me he couldn't afford to pay for advertising. And when people come with these problems, I always like to provoke an alternative exploration of the concept they're challenged by. So I said to him, if you can't afford to pay for advertising, what would happen if you were to think of a way that you could get paid to promote your own business? 180-degree flip. Well, here you can see, suddenly he starts to say, I've tried your approach and it works. 10 out of 10, you're saving me money. I'm not saving Jason money. Jason's saving himself money because he's thinking differently about the situation. Now, he goes on Facebook one evening to say to me, don't forget the cake. And as part of what we do, these 4 days of workshops, I believe we should celebrate the end of it. And so as a personal challenge to me, everyone in the workshop is going through a challenge to themselves, learning and improving. I bake them a cake, but I'm not very good at baking. So can a crisis cause creative thinking? Here's the cake. Now, inevitably, that's what the picture on the internet looked like. And this was actually the cake as it ended up being presented at the end of this workshop. And I show you this not to show you my cooking skills, which aren't brilliant, but to show you that the result is perfect. Not perfect as in amazing, but per effect, a direct result of action taken. We don't pick up a violin and play a piano concerto first time. We don't jump on a skateboard and land an amazing trick. We have to practice things. We have to expect to fail to start with in order to constantly improve and eventually bake something worth eating. So success should always be celebrated. But the problem with a lot of entrepreneurs is they're too busy thinking of the rainbows, the fast cars, the yachts, the big houses, the expensive holidays. And they forget about the small little successes, the things that happen every 2 weeks, every day. In actual fact, entrepreneurs are very, very good at seeing the big vision, the big picture. But when you ask them, and when you look in the foreground of this picture here, whether they're turning left or right when they leave their front door, they often don't know where they're going next. So what actually happens when a disaster comes along that disrupts tranquility, that nice, safe comfort zone we get used to living in? Take this horrific storm the other day in the Philippines. And I mean, this picture shows the scale of it. And perhaps we can send some thoughts towards the people in the Philippines who right now are being forced to be very creative in the way they're reconstructing their lives. But actually, something closer to home, my great friend Carol. Now, Carol broke her leg a couple of years ago, and she was working as a chef in a restaurant at the time. And because of the nature of the seasonal job and the seasonal contract, the fact she'd broken her leg meant she lost her job. Now, being the caring friend that I am, I went round to her house with, a few gifts and a little card to make her feel better. And in this card, I'd written what I thought was this inspiring message about silver linings to clouds, and something positive may come from this fact she's broken her leg, and who knows, she might start a business. Now, Carol was furious. She was so angry with me. How can you say I start a business? I've got a leg in plaster, I can't move, I'm in pain, etc. But look, 2 years later, Carol runs a beautiful chef-at-home business where she cooks for people, she cooks for restaurants, she manages her own time, and she has an income that supports her and gives her space to look after her 2 young boys. So a point of pain can be a catalyst for great change. And this is really where I bring you round to the story of the Global Brainstorm. Having been at this event in London 18 months ago, where the Global Entrepreneurship Week Committee came together to talk about how we as inspiring entrepreneurs must help the entrepreneurs of the future to get started. And one of the messages that came from this conference was that we had to be more caring in our approach, care for each other. And we also had to be more sharing. We had to be transparent with our information and make it available for everybody else too. And we also had to be more daring, take those risks, jump in with 2 feet, learn from the consequences. And so in the spirit of being caring, sharing and daring, I posted this little 3-minute video on YouTube explaining this concept. And what happened next was a lady who I'd never met before from Nigeria contacted me, and between us something called the 30 Days Business Challenge was born, where we actually had 30 women come together for 30 days, each to create a 3-minute video, which actually kick-started all 30 of these businesses. Now, I show you this to illustrate to you that this was not about waiting for someone to give us permission. It was not about some greater support structure, some government-enabled program. This was about a group of ladies on Facebook getting together to support each other. And that's really how we need to be working, especially as women, where confidence is something that we need each other's support to overcome. So one of the lies that we tell ourselves is that we haven't got what we need. We haven't got the cash we need. We haven't got the skills we need. We haven't got the qualifications we need. But in actual fact, smart thinking and smartphones, which often are at our fingertips these days, really do connect the world. We're fortunate enough to live in a time where we have in our fingertips something that can enable us to start a business. We need little more than that and a head that's switched on. So we cannot solve the problems that we created with the same thinking that made them so. This is a quote from Albert Einstein, and it's very, very true. We have to disrupt our thinking in order to see a different situation, in order to solve some of these problems. Now, that's what the Global Brainstorm's all about, broadening our perception so that we start to look at the situation differently. They say 90% of the mistakes we make are errors of perception, not logic. Logically, we're great at thinking our way through the situation, but sometimes we fail to see it correctly. So is this a crisis, or is it a tremendous opportunity where things are changing and constantly evolving and opening up new seeds of opportunities for all of us as entrepreneurs to take advantage of. When I went and told this gentleman who's a great mentor of mine, his name's Dr. Edward de Bono, and he's written over 80 books on the subject of lateral thinking. When I told him that I was coming out to Athens to talk to all of you guys and to host the global brainstorm here, he told me I was to tell you that your ancient forefathers wrecked Western thinking. Now, I don't actually believe that to be true. I think we've got excellent examples of thinking all around the world. However, what the Greek gang of three, as Dr. de Bono calls them, Socrates, Aristotle, and Plato did, was they set us up with a way of thinking systemically that's actually evolved to be very black or white, right or wrong, for or against. And of course, life is so much more dynamic and colourful than that. So we have to upgrade our thinking. Because currently, when we look at this in the diagrammatical form here, this is how, as a system, we're operating. So you ask her what number she sees in front of them, and she sees the number 6. You ask him what number he sees, and he sees the number 9. And they can waste so much time arguing who's right and who's wrong. So instead of that way of conflicting against each other, of having to put someone down in order to push ourselves up, we switch, we upgrade, and we start to adopt a parallel perspective. Instead of spending 10 minutes arguing, we agree. We spend 5 minutes looking at it from this point of view, and 5 minutes looking at it from this point of view. And suddenly we see the situation differently. We begin to talk about the fact it's a black line, that it's squiggly, that it's not very well drawn, and the conversation moves onto a deeper level. So you can be right all of the time. Just remember that story of the 6 and the 9 and think about things. I'm a strong believer that your thoughts are things that materialize the more you think about them. If you're telling yourself you can't do something, you'll never be able to do it. You have to watch what your own thoughts are telling you, because it's when we bring both the creative thinking and the logical thinking together that the real sparks of genius start to occur. Scientists studying the brain are paralleling it to studying the universe, so infinite does it appear. And although what we're doing here might seem like a simple drop in the ocean, the ripple effects of this can change the future for years. So believe in your own capability to have that influence, however much of a small drop what you're doing might feel. So rather than looking at it in this positive or negative, black or white, red or green in this case, two-dimensional way, I'm inviting you to upgrade your thinking to a 7-dimensional process called the weather forecast. By replicating nature's most balanced ecosystem, the weather, in our thoughts, in the way we frame our decisions, suddenly we start to broaden out our perspective and bring that critical thinking and the creative thinking together so as to stimulate these sparks of genius. So whether you know what you're doing, whether you're completely undecided, whether you're asking yourself some challenging questions, I invite you to come and attend the workshop tomorrow, where we'll be using this weather forecast technique as an action learning process to help you decide for yourselves how best to take the next step. Now, I've seen the results of this firsthand, and we ran a workshop in Thessaloniki just the day before yesterday, and transformations were instant. You see it in people's eyes. Suddenly there's clarity, there's hope, there's an understanding of how to take that next step. So I do urge you to come and join me, but don't trust me, trust Jason. Thank you very much for listening.